So now that we have our sign in with Google, let's actually make our sign in with email. We are first going to modify our sign in component so that it actually produces our sign in with email start call instead of doing it itself. This is pretty much going to be the only place in the code base that we need to change as far as our sign in component goes. So what we're going to do is we are going to modify our code right here to remove this try block. We don't need this doing it anymore for us. We also don't need to call these libraries that we're bringing in from Firebase utils. So let's just get rid of them. And what we do need to do is we need to import in our email sign in start method, which we will also now attach to our dispatch. Now, similarly here, what we're going to get back is an email and a password. And what we're going to dispatch out is this, except we're going to pass it in as an object, where the keys go to the values. And now we're going to use this inside of our handle submit. So we need to remember to destructure off this from our props. And then we just simply call our email sign and start, where we pass in our email and password. Now, you might be wondering, why would we destructure this off of props if this is only the one place where we're going to use it? Would it not be easier just to call this.props.email sign and start? This is actually known as a better practice to just destructure off this way. It's a little bit more verbose, but reading it is actually way easier because you know that once you destructure this value, it helps if you don't see like this.props everywhere. It's just the better pattern for us to consistently follow, in case you were wondering why we always destructure. So now that we have our email sign and start, we go back to our Saga, and then we're going to listen for it. So let's bring in our email sign in success, because we know we're going to write these. And now what we do is we make our new function on email sign in start, just like our Google sign in start. Except this time we're listening for, of course, our email sign in start. And then we're going to pass it a similar function as our sign in with Google, except it'll be our sign in with email. Now we know what we're going to get is our payload, right? But we're going to get our whole action when we pass this function into our take latest call. We're going to get the entire action that we're catching here with our take latest. And all we want off of it is the payload. So we're going to destructure off the payload. And then we want to destructure off the email and the password, because that's all we want from our payload. And we know that the payload is coming in as an object. And now what we're going to do is we are going to put that on sign-in that we had before inside of our sign-in component into this Saga. So in order for us to put this in the Saga, we need to first create our try block, right, where we're actually going to make the API request. And this is going to catch the error, exactly like we had earlier. And here, in fact, we can just call our sign-in our email sign-in failure with our error. And then inside of our try block, we are going to sign in and pluck off the user, right? Just like we had here, except we're using a different sign-in method. Instead of using sign-in with pop-up, we're using sign-in with email and password. Now, the lucky thing for us is that this auth will give us back the same type of object that we got back from our sign-in with pop-up. So we know that we can just pluck the user off the same way that we did here and get our user auth object that we need to trigger the rest of this call. In fact, the rest of this call is going to be the exact same. The only difference is that the method that we fire is not Google sign-in success, but email sign-in success. Now, if we save, what we can do is we can just pass this into our user sagas as well. And now inside of our sign-in component, we just make sure that everything is wired in properly, which it is. And let's check out our sign-in. So now, if we click sign in with email, we see we trigger our email sign-in start, and we have a successful email sign-in. And our user is also storing the correct user. So we've successfully migrated over our sign-in with email and our sign-in with Google into their own respective sagas. If we look at our saga, we see that we're pretty much doing exactly what we had before, except now we're handling them in their individual saga. So hopefully this made more sense once we went over it again with sign-in with email. We write a listener that listens for the start call of our API call. We give it the respective object if it needs, right? So our email, of course, we need an email and password in order to trigger our auth inside of the saga, whereas our Google did not. Our Google will simply call the auth.signin with popup using the Google provider, right? Which will create the right popup inside of our application. Once that succeeds and the user selects the right user, we get back our user auth object that has the actual user details on this user key. We take it and we call our create user profile document method that we have in our Firebase utils, which gives us back our user ref. It will also generate the snapshot if we need one. And then once we have this, we get the snapshot using the user ref, and then we just put out a success. This success method will then update our user reducer using this object that we pass to it, which is our current user object. And that's essentially it. Now we can actually, looking at this, see that we can refactor this a little bit because it looks like that we have pretty much the exact same thing here and here, in fact. The only difference is how we get the user object. And the only difference is that here we use our Google sign-in, and here we use sign-in with email and password. So this is a chance for us to actually refactor our code to make it a little bit more concise. So what we can do is we can modify our user actions as well as our user action types so that instead of having separate success and failure calls, they have the same success and failure call. So here, we'll just do a sign-in success, sign-in failure, which will represent both our email success and our Google success, and the respective failure as well. We modify our actions so that instead we know we need to keep our Google sign-in start. We know we need to keep our email sign-in start. We don't need this Google sign-in success and this Google sign-in failure, nor do we need the email sign-in success or email sign-in failure because they are actually the exact same thing except just with different action types. And now we'll see that we have very similar code. We don't need our set current user anymore because we're not using that action anymore. And we're also going to remove the reference to it inside of our app.js. So here we'll get rid of that. We'll get rid of our call to set current user inside of our component did mount. We'll also get rid of our map dispatch to props because now our Saga is handling setting our current user on success. And then we also need to make sure that our action types are referencing the correct one. So no more Google sign-in success. Now it's sign-in success. And now in our sagas, we got to update our code to leverage the correct actions as well. So instead of Google sign-in, we're going to use our new sign-in success, as well as our sign-in failure. Now, if we save our application, hopefully we see that our sign-in still works. So we'll trigger our Google sign-in. And we see that it succeeds. If we hit our sign out, right, we actually are no longer listening, as you remember, inside of our app.js for our auth state to change. So our sign out, while it's still signing out in our Firestore backend, it's not actually telling us that it is because we're not leveraging this listener code anymore. So our app has no way of knowing that we've signed out successfully. But on another note, we no longer have persistence either. So if we refresh, we'll see that we can sign in again. So there we have both email and our Google sign-in leveraging the same sign-in success methods now. So we've managed to reduce our code down, which is definitely a win in terms of refactoring. In fact, if we look at our sagas, we can even see that we are pretty much copying the exact same code here as we are here. So we can move this into its own generator function as well. So let's actually do that. Let's make a new generator function called getSnapshot from userAuth, which is going to give us a userAuth object. And then we're going to pretty much just duplicate this code. Except we need the beginning of our try. And instead of passing in user, we're going to pass in our userAuth. And we're just going to leverage this function here by calling yield with our user. So just like we did with when we write reusable functions, we just wrote a reusable generator function. We know that at both points we get our userAuth objects from our respective auth sign-in methods, and then we pass it in, and this will now perform the actual get as well as the sign-in failure. Now we want to keep our own sign-in failure catch blocks here as well, because our sign-in with pop-up and our sign-in with email may also fail. So we just got to make sure that we also wrap anywhere where we have different API requests inside their own try catch block. And it's fine because we know the sign-in failure can work on any of our failures or errors inside of the whole sign-in process. So we can use the same sign-in failure method. It's no problem for us. And now that we have moved this into its own function, we just got to double check to make sure that everything still works. Let's see. Sign in success. Awesome. We refresh. And we'll try our sign in with email. Also success. Amazing. So now we've managed to pretty much move the functionality of what we had before into this more commonly seen promise-oriented fetch style of using sagas. So hopefully this made more sense now that we did a little bit of refactoring as well about what we can do with sagas and how sagas can be composed. If it's confusing, definitely don't worry. I suggest you rewatch these videos, right? Sagas is by nature definitely more confusing. And if you're following along, incredible. You're going to be able to really leverage this pattern in any professional React Redux career that you end up following it. Now, in the next lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to recreate that persistence that we had before in our application. So instead, before when we had this listener on our component did mount doing for it, we're going to functionally check against the auth library to see if our user session is still persisted. So we'll do that in the next lesson.